with kind of being open to discover what that really, really means and being really mature about it and really kind of asking the question of like, does this make sense to me? To me, not to my partner or to my parents or to, the world or to whoever, like, do these ideas and concepts make sense to me?
Hello, my name is Elle Harris, and thank you for checking out the Seven Podcast. Today, we are talking about self-identity. And this is so important because I think we lose ourselves in titles and words and what we actually do instead of who we actually are. So I chose someone today who's helped me kind of define and go down that road of just figuring out who you are, right? Her name is Charlene. Charlene's an amazing human being, and I'm so thankful that she was able to be a part of this. So check out this episode and let me know what you think. All right, so hello everyone. Episode of 7, the mini podcast series. And so I'm so happy that today I have the amazing, wonderful, incomparable Charlene Cutting, and I will have her introduce herself to you all, and then I'll kind of share why I asked Charlene to be a part of this episode.
Thank you, Elle. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Well, yep, I'm Charlene Cutting, and I'm not really going to say more than that right now, just based on kind of the few clues you've given me about what this is going to be. So I'll just leave it at my name for now.
And this is exactly why I chose you to be a part of this, because I knew you would do that. The reason why I asked Charlene to be here is because this episode is about self, right? And what you'll learn while we're going through these episodes is that this is really about getting to self-actualization, like being able to be your truest and highest authentic self, outside of titles, outside of names, outside of other things. Like, what is it going to take to you to get to who you are so that you can fulfill what it is that you are here to do? And so along this journey, Charlene used to be my supervisor, and I was so blessed to have her because in those moments, I've been able to have just some really thought provoking and deep conversations with Charlene. And I think that it is so amazing when you meet someone who talks about the things in their life and just give you concrete like thought, and just you just kind of expanded my horizons of the way I thought about myself and things in life, and I really appreciated that. And it made me understand like how important self is before I can get into anything else in the world. And I know we always hear that whole cliche of like putting your mask on first before you put the mask on someone else, but I think the conversations that I've had with you has really like helped me to really understand that instead of just looking at it as that cliche, but really figuring out who I am before the world deems me something. Right.
Mhm.
So that's why I wanted you to be a part of this. So I hope that people are able in this short time get just a glimpse of what I get out of you, and maybe one day they'll be able to book you to have these moments. So I really wanted to do that. So just jumping kind of in there, how do you feel people get to really discover who they are outside of just titles?
Mm. That's a big question. And I think that you know, titles. It's kind of in the question. Like a title is not necessarily. It's not you. It's not who you are. It's generally associated to a role that you're either given or you're performing. But I think obviously the problem is that people then associate their identity with that title, and then there becomes perhaps a confusion or just an absence of just self-awareness, or perhaps a sense of emptiness, or perhaps it's never even considered. So yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's not particularly something that I've struggled with. I think for some reason, I'm not sure why, it's always been pretty obvious for me that what I do isn't necessarily what I am.
Mm.
And even the roles or titles that have been assigned to me, I understand that that's not actually my identity. They do help to kind of like make up some of what I am in terms of like how I carry myself, or sometimes it can influence behaviors, appropriateness, things like that. But beyond all of that, I believe that there is self. There is a self that we all have that is perhaps, for want of a better term, higher or bigger or broader than any title. And I think that's the challenge is finding what works to be able to connect with that. And I think for a lot of people, it does require, unfortunately, some pain or adversity in life to be able to kind of like even start to ask those questions like, who am I? What am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? Why is this happening? And yeah, what is this title? What does it mean? Because even in the sense of perhaps in the family of origin, you perhaps are a daughter or a son or a brother or a sister or a mum or a dad. Those are titles as well, right? Those are roles.
Right.
And then it seems like as we go on through life, it just from that kind of like the institution of family, it just continues on. So it's pretty hard to escape that. So kind of like self awareness and knowing yourself is paramount. I think.
What do you think it is? Like, I hear what you're saying. Like, you personally never really had to go through that, trying to decipher between the two. What do you think it is that happens in life that gets us to a place of like, this is how I need to identify? Because I think for me, when I had this issue of just like self-worth, I felt like titles were going to be the thing to make me feel like I belonged in a certain space or in a certain room, right? Or I'm an equal or I'm above. You know what I mean? But then once I got those titles, they absolutely didn't feel what I thought they were going to feel like. Now, there are some people that will probably get them and then they just ride that wave, right? But I knew for me, every time I achieved something, and I know that, looking at it on this side, a lot of my achievements were addictions.
Right.
So that could be what it is. But I realized that it didn't qualify me or quantify who I was. So, but it was still that place of trying to figure out like who am I? And there's that fight, maybe that self-awareness within me that's like, wait, this is not who we are. So there's a warring. So do you think what happens to us to get us to a place like that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like a sense of lack, isn't it? Essentially, and then it starts a quest of discovery, and I think, or just trying to feel that sense of lack or feel that sense of emptiness. And I think that expectation, domestication, being influenced from obviously our environments, from obviously being born, and then whatever environment we're born into, that plays a massive influence. And depending on what that looks like, that's going to pretty much determine or dictate kind of what happens going forward if we don't have necessarily healthy influences that promote things like autonomy. So I think that the more titles there are, the harder it is to have that kind of sense of autonomy and sense of true self. So yeah, I think for me, I've always been interested in looking through that sense of that kind of facade. For some reason, I kind of just had this sense from a very young age that people were performing for want of a better term, perhaps,
Mm,
because it was expected. And so kind of like once you leave the house, you become almost a different version of yourself, or you have to become what is deemed appropriate or suitable or acceptable to society and all the different environments within that, whether it's school or work or whatever that might look like. It could be a sorority, it could be any place, the church. So I think that we're always adapting depending upon what is seen as the standard bar of acceptability. So in that sense, it's really hard because you're kind of like forced or encouraged to lose your sense of self. I mean, even when you go to say church or a place of work, depending on what it is that you do, the way that you dress, the way that you carry yourself, everything has to change to be, to fit in with that environment. But I think, like I say, going back to what I was saying, that I always just felt that like people were not necessarily who they presented themselves to be. And I found that the more somebody identified with either a role or a title, I found that there seemed to be an internal struggle that was actually hidden deeper than with perhaps somebody who perhaps didn't identify as strongly with their role or title
right.
or titles or roles. They were a little bit more transparent, perhaps, in kind of where they were at and who they were. But interestingly, they may have been shunned more in society or rejected more or faced like bigger challenges, perhaps, in different ways
Mm.
for being brave to just be themselves.
I love that. So that kind of brings me to our second question and just that struggle, that battle. I think that sometimes you can't even get to the place of thinking outside of your roles until you have made yourself a priority, like literally made self a priority. Why do you think we struggle with making ourselves a priority?
Again, I think it's because we become so kind of automatic in what we do. And depending on, again, what it is that you're doing or what your life looks like or, what privileges that you may or may not have, it's really hard to necessarily make yourself the priority. There could be poverty, there could be responsibility, there could be parenthood, there's so many things that factor in, which kind of like robs us of being able to make ourselves a priority. I think in particular, women, particularly women of color, are think just generally, for at least in my experience, I can only obviously speak from my experience, but like so, my mum is Jamaican, and I know that kind of in that culture, what I would see a lot is that the women were always kind of like coming second after they
Mm,
had taken care of everybody else, and the men were always first, right? So as long as the men were taken care of, then the kids. So not even the kids first, it was generally the men, then the children, and then they would come last. And so yeah, I think also it's hard to make yourself a priority sometimes because of the seductiveness of being busy or distracted.
mm.
I think that there's a huge conversation that needs to be had on the addiction to busyness or distraction or workaholism in general, particularly in America. And so I think that it's really really hard to try to understand that, like, am I doing this because it needs to be done, or am I doing this because I am afraid of what it might mean if I am able to sit with myself? What does it mean if I do make myself a priority? Is this such a foreign concept to me that it's now become scary? Um, so I think there's a million reasons and variables as to why somebody may not be able to make themselves a priority. But there's like a quote or a saying that says, like, deal with your pain or your pain deals with you. And I think that unfortunately, once again, pain is the touchstone to all kind of spiritual and emotional growth for a lot of people. So it generally is when things start to break down, things start to fall apart. Perhaps we start to see those cracks in the mask that we present, or whatever it is that we are then forced to start to kind of like question, well, what is going on? Why am I so burnt out? Why can't I put myself first? Why is everything coming before that?
I think about that book you talk about, like the body keeps score,
Yeah.
right? And I remember having a conversation with someone recently, and we talked about when you are busy and quote unquote productive, right? Everybody wants to be booked and busy. So when you're busy and you're doing stuff over and over, your mind doesn't have time to tell you the alarming things that it's trying to tell you. Like, we're not together. We're not, we need to do this. We need to focus on this. This is not what we're, but when you quiet yourself, then your brain's like, oh, nothing else is going on. And then all of these thoughts just kind of rush in at the same time.
Hmm.
And that can be like overwhelming, especially if you don't know how to process what's happening. Because
Right.
your body's like, I have her attention. Let's talk. Let's say what's wrong. Let me feel this pain right here because this is the side effect of this. Because now we're quiet, we've been able to sit long enough for our brain to do what it's supposed to do, to
Hmm.
alarm us, to protect us, to tell us that we're off course of what we're doing.
Hmm.
But that's scary for some people. Like, we go through this
Really.
path of like, right? Like, I want to know who I am. I want to be someone outside of a title, but I also don't want to deal with what brought me here, right?
Yeah,
I don't
I
want to
think
deal with
you're
that.
absolutely correct. Yeah, I agree. And I think that, like, I don't think, I think it's so, I think generally as society we're so judgmental, and like, these conversations are interesting because none of it is to say that, like, well, you're not doing this because of this. It's actually everything that we do is pretty much for survival, right? Like, it's all about getting through. And so if it means that it's working or distraction or that busyness or whatever it might be, that's what we're going to go. We're going to choose what seems to be the most logical to us, depending on kind of like where we're coming from, because it's all about just surviving
It
for
is.
a lot of the time.
And I think that's probably why so many of us women have heart disease. We have, like, I think that's the number one killer of women. Like, we have all of these things and these matters that trigger here because we didn't have time to listen here. or give it a rest. And it's like what you just said, we put everyone first. Like even in your culture, like I would just say like we're just taught to take care of everyone else before taking care of self. Like I
Yeah,
noticed that like when I do things for my daughter and I'm thinking that that helps her learn how to take care of herself, but no, it's just teaching her how to serve. It's not telling
right.
her to do things independently. It's showing if I come in her room and I look a mess and I have my bonnet on, I know she's gonna think that's okay. But she's like, no, mommy, take your bonnet off. So I try to be mindful of like how I present myself because I want her to know that I take care of me. So I
Mm.
model take care of you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But if we don't have that model, if we've always seen like it's always the strong black woman, but the strong black woman is tired, bent over, has to go to the doctor, may have high blood pressure, may have diabetes because the world has beat them down, and the only comfort they had was food because they didn't have a voice, but they didn't feel like they had time to even develop who they were because they were too busy trying to be everything else or these titles to the world. So in saying that, I would kind of go into the kind of last question really, being kind and gentle with yourself. Like people say that, but do we really know what that means? Like what does that mean to you?
Being kind and gentle. I think that there probably would have been a certain point in my life where even just that question or just the posing that to myself would have been really hard and uncomfortable. I think it's very challenging to be kind and gentle to yourself if there's self hatred. It's hard to be kind and gentle to yourself if you've experienced dehumanization. It's kind to be kind and gentle to yourself when perhaps environments, people, places, and things are set up to perhaps influence you to believe that you're not worthy of gentleness or kindness. And so it's really much a case of breaking through all of these false narratives, and a lot of it's just historical, generational things that have carried forward. I think the trouble is as well with that is that we sometimes give honor and credit to things that no longer work and actually have never made sense. We just continue to say these things because it's kind of like what the herd say. So I think that sometimes we carry on these kind of generational, I don't know, they could end up being curses, but we don't necessarily see them as that because we've become so domesticated to believe that that is what our role is, that's what we're supposed to do. But actually, if you scratch below the surface and investigate a little bit further, you'll find that this doesn't even actually serve me. This doesn't actually work. So I think that, I didn't particularly have a role model that kind of framed uh, kindness or gentleness in my youth. It's taken me as long as it's taken me to experience people who are able to model that. And so, yeah, it's completely detrimental, isn't it? But
Yeah.
it's about kind of like completely being like honest, open, and willing to kind of explore what those words mean to you and, like are you able to offer gentleness and kindness to others? And if you can, or if you are, then why are you not able to offer those things to yourself? If you're able to offer that to a child or, a loved one, then again, why are you not able to offer those things to yourself? And just kind of treating yourself as if you would treat a younger child, like what are the narratives that are going on inside of your head? Like how are you talking about yourself or to yourself? What would that look like if you had to wear that all over you and you could actually see those words written on you. So I think that fundamentally I had to come to believe that I was actually worthy of kindness and gentleness, and that had to be, I don't know, like a real come to believe, not just kind of like superficial or kind of like frothy emotional appeal. It couldn't just be an inspirational quote that I read once. It was I had to have real people around who could model those things and helped me to discover that actually I am worthy of kindness, I am worthy of gentleness. And I think personally, like I had to completely reframe my ideas on kind of like spirituality and what that meant and knowing that like I'm worthy of the same love as anybody else and I'm no better than and I'm no less than, and that we're all kind of like existing here in one big beautiful economy. If you can look at it like that, I think it's interesting. I think fundamentally the problem lies in that we all believe that we're wholly different, but I think that we have a lot more similarities than we have differences, which is quite hard in current climates.
Yeah.
But beneath all of those titles and labels, there's much more that I think that we have in common.
I think that it takes like a I wish we could have like a balancing of the scales, right? Like you just said, if we could take away the race and the gender and all these different things that we are seeing that's causing people to be at each other, I think that's what helps us be able to see how much we are alike, right? And I'm not saying that we live in a world that we don't see color and, all of that, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying like if we can go beyond the things that we allow to separate us and really see I'm no different, you're no different. We have different walks of life, but we are all the same, right? We all have a purpose. We're all trying to get through this thing. We're just on different levels of getting through it. It kind of helps like be able to view things in a different way. And I feel like we aren't able to fully grasp like ourselves, the world, like what kindness is. And like while you were talking, I was thinking about I've been in places or times in my life where people would say something kind and I would literally cringe.
Right.
Like, oh, you're so da and I'm like, just stop talking. Like it doesn't feel right. Right. And it's crazy that like it's crazy how the mind works because as it is the most beautiful thing in the world, it can also be one of the most daunting things because those words that you've heard from other people for so long, those things that make you feel bad, you begin to believe it, that muscle memory.
Mm.
And then you get into this place of like when someone says something contrary of what your muscle memory is now believing about who you are, it's like, no, we're not happy about this. Run. This is not good. It's not good. You're not beautiful. You're not smart. You're not capable. You're not, a great human. You're not, all of those things. So it's like, no, this is not true. Now, how do I quiet myself long enough? How do I not stay busy long enough to really get to what you just said, the foundational part? Like, once I move past I want to put this quote out here because now I'm just this beautiful flower and life is great and I'm going to follow this philosophy. Once I get past the trying to show you that I'm like, I can fool you, but I cannot fool me. I can
Mm.
tell you that I'm healed from this thing and that I truly know who I am outside of the titles, but I cannot fool myself because I still have to go home with me. I still have to sit down with me and say, yeah, you just told them that this is who you are, but you don't even believe that. Like we don't
Yeah.
believe that.
And I think depending on what the title is, why would you? I think the question really is, why do you feel that you need to be so deeply associated with that title that it has to be your identity? Like, why are you not actually enough? Like, why do I need to be referred to as doctor whatever or whatever? Right? That's just off the top of
Right,
my head.
right.
Why am I offended if nobody actually uses that before my name? Like, I know who I am, therefore it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
But I was thinking when you was talking that like so much of all of this to me it seems like it really boils down to the premise of your belief system and kind of perhaps what you was introduced to as ideas of perhaps spirituality or like, so for example, if you believe in a punishing God, then I think it's very hard to not see yourself as being worthy of punishment,
Mm,
right? So I find it hard to believe that God can be loving and punishing. I personally can't, consign to that belief.
hmm.
And so I think that that premise that is introduced to us generally and widely accepted in Western culture, I think that it can be quite damaging because it's confusing because we want to connect to each other, we want to connect to ourselves, we want to connect to this idea of a type of higher power, but at the same time it contradicts itself because if we fall outside of the parameters of what is acceptable, then there's this idea that we are unacceptable, we are unloved, we are unworthy. And I think that's when we start to use things to fill ourselves up to give us that sense of worth like titles and roles and whatever. So I think that it's so much to do with kind of being open to discover what that really, really means and being really mature about it and really kind of asking the question of like, does this make sense to me? to me, not to my partner or to my parents or to, the world or to whoever. Like, do these ideas and concepts make sense to me? Or are the contradictions actually causing a contradiction or a divide within myself that's now leading me to now have to wear these masks and live a type of a double
Mm.
existence? Whereas, like you say, I can present myself as one way, but inside, if I don't believe that, then what's the point? There's still going to be pain and suffering.
I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think that we have this. I feel like there's is a scripture, and I'm probably gonna get it wrong, but it's something like almost like know the Bible for yourself, right? Like it's almost like not you have to learn it for yourself. You have to learn who God is in your life for yourself. Because if you don't, someone else's interpretation could then be your view of what it is. So for me, I grew up in a very like structured, angry, God is going to get you, you're going to hell type church, right? And then I had that premise for so long. And now listening to what you said, I never thought about the connection with that and self worth. But if you have already been deemed as not qualified or inept or not enough by the person who created you, then why would
Right.
you even believe that you are enough, right? So it took a lot of me over the last few years, like re-understanding and redefining like what that relationship looks like for me, right? And when I remove all of the humanistic characteristics from it, right, and learn for myself, I know like what God is for me, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's that thing that everyone has to learn for yourself. However, what if it's a person who doesn't have the time to say, let me learn for myself? I'm just going to listen to this man who I believe or this woman who I believe has my best interest at heart. And they're telling me that I have to wear this skirt every Sunday, even to work, I have to wear this and I can't wear lipstick and I got to go in here. And if I look at this man the wrong way, I'm going to die. And like all of those things, there are people who truly believe that. We kind of saw something. I don't know if you saw what happened on social media last week where a young girl went into church and she got in front of the church and told them that she was pregnant. She was 14, and the pastor made her get up there. And I think about how, everyone was like, oh, we'll throw her a baby shower, we'll do this. And I'm like, it's so much bigger than that. It has nothing to do with the baby shower. It has nothing. This is her community. This is what she knows and this is what she believes is right because she's entrusted these people to believe the right thing for her. But it goes back to what I'm saying of understanding for yourself. And like you just said, with coming with self, like you have to get to a point, and I just have to believe this, that we all have a moment, if not more than one moment in our life where self says, knock knock, I'm trying to get you to understand that this is this is not it. The title doesn't matter, Elle. You don't have to be, if they don't call you Dr. L, don't freak out. Like, get away from that. Let's talk about who you are, right? I truly have to believe that we all come to a point in our life where we either are going to face it and we're going to move to a place of like, I'm no longer that, or we get to a place where it's like, all right, I'm gonna live in it and I'm just gonna continue to conform to this title. And I think for me now it's so hard because when I go places, people will say, like, what's your name? I'm like, I'm Elle. And they're like, what do you do? And I do this. Because that's such a full question now for me. Because I'm not a title. I'm not this. I don't it's not, it doesn't define me anymore. So it's hard for me to even answer that question anymore other than I'm a servant, right? I'm here to fulfill a purpose. I am a being here to fulfill a purpose. I am spirit, an amazing spirit, a light. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm at that place and I'm not at the place of just like, oh, I am this and I do that. Because that does not define me. Those are just the talents that I have that I'm able to use because of the self of the spirit of who I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah. I mean, like everything you said, I'm there with you. I mean, even going back to the church with the young woman who was pregnant and felt the need that she had to do that, or was maybe influenced to do that. I mean, what has happened where somebody would think that that's what God would want for anybody, to be humiliated, to feel shame, to feel that they owe anybody an explanation about anything that's going on in there. I don't know.
Right.
It's a shame actually that we have projected so much of our flaws and perhaps our own, again, for want of a better word, sins we've projected all of that onto this idea of God and then deemed that to be God.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why, education and travel and open-mindedness and individual study and reflection is so important, because it really does help to kind of like broaden your ideas on that. But yeah, um, absolutely. I just think that, yeah, I don't think that any of us are all here because we're supposed to, not be who we are. I think that
Right.
none of us are born with a title. None of us are born with a specific role on a piece of paper, like a job description that we have to fulfill. And if we don't do it, then, oh no, like something awful is going to happen. I think it's so much to do, I think, with fear of, I don't know, security, survival. And I
Mm.
think all survival was based on love, ultimately. So everything that we do, well, if I don't get that respect that I think that I should get, then it might mean that that person doesn't like me or they don't love me. And if that's not there, then how can I truly survive?
Right.
Because obviously that is fundamental to life itself. So I think ultimately it's just about fear of like not being accepted. But yeah,
Yep. That fear of not belonging, and like going back to Maslow, like there we want to fit in when we are all born. I think that's the part that's so interesting about me, about we want to fit in when we're not born to conform. I feel like we all, 7 billion of us, and the people who have come and gone and who will come after us, I think we all have like unique, intricate things, within us that we are supposed to do, that we are destined to do, but we prefer to conform and be among everyone else, because if I don't have community, because we're social beings, if I don't have community and if I don't assimilate, then will I be loved? Will I be liked?
yeah, yeah, ultimately. And so you end up compromising your own authenticity. So, I think there's so many different talks and conversations out there about, I think we've even talked about it, authenticity versus survival. And
Hmm.
survival is always going to win, right? So, like, if there's a choice, if there's a choice to be had, if you have to choose between authenticity or survival, right? If it means giving up your authenticity so that you will survive, like you're going to choose survival, because you think that because we've become so detached from our true selves that we don't realize that it's by losing your authenticity that you're not going to survive.
Mm.
It's by conforming that you end up losing that, and then you feel you kind of die, however many spiritual and mental deaths that you have to, until you realize, oh, this ain't it. I've been led in the wrong direction. If you have a child and that child believes that if they go against what their parent says, then they won't be loved, to them, that is survival.
Yeah.
So if the child is playing and they're happy and they're doing what children do, and perhaps the parent is, or whoever's looking after them is stressed out or got things going on and they don't want to hear the noise, and they tell that child to be quiet, the child is going to go with like, okay, I was just being beautiful and just being my bold, creative self that I came into this world
Right.
as, because inherently we all are creative. And that's where our freedom is. And so that's what children are. That's what they do. And then we are corrupted as we go along. We become jaded. Obviously, we learn things, and then we have our own stuff. Then we put that on the child, and then they are faced with a decision, right? Like if I keep being my authentic, creative, fun self, then mum or dad or whoever isn't going to love me. So let me
Yeah.
suppress that now. Let me be whatever it is that they need me to be, because I need to know that I'm loved. And obviously, the only way for me to be loved is to do what they need me to do, which is to be whatever it is that they need me to be. And so I think that so much of the self that we truly are gets lost in those early formative developmental years. I've still got a timer on my side. Yeah, there's always thoughts. So I could go, you know what it's like. We could sit down forever and think. It's just interesting. Like, just brought back some interesting memories. I've pretty much written journals like my whole life, and I remember being quite young, early teens, and actually writing in there. Like, isn't it so interesting that people always ask, "What do you want to do?" When you get older or when you grow up, as opposed to like, you know, what would you like to, what would you like to? what do you like doing? Like, what do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Like, it's so interesting that we always get posed the question of like, what do you want to do when you get older, in terms of like basically asking you what career or what job that you'd like to have when you get older. And it's so interesting. I think that most of the pain that we experience is because God already creates us perfect, and then we have this kind of fake humility and say, I can't be perfect because nothing's perfect because we're all sinners or something like that. And then it's like trying to put a round peg into a square hole, not realizing that we are already designed to be exactly who we are, right? And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to play God by saying, who I was created to be is not enough. Let me make that up myself. Let me now become all these different things. And then we wonder why we feel bad or suffer.
So I hope you walk away with having some more understanding about who you are, or being able to take some time to just sit down and listen and figure out who you actually are. But I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you loved it. And check us out next week.